I got sick in 2004. The number of times since I got sick with ME 16 years ago that I have dreamt of having ME or dreamt of being ill is zero. I am always well in my dreams. And there are two other features that are frequent in my dreams and say quite a lot about the predicament of living with ME. The most common recurring dream I have is flying, and not necessarily high up in the sky, sometimes just a few meters above a street, but I regularly fly in my dreams. And another slightly less frequent thing that still recurs in my dreams is a kind of drowning in reverse, so that I can breathe underwater and I would suffocate if I came up for air to the surface. And there's something delightfully deranged and surreal about that reminds me of this line that Werner Herzog loves, quoting from Hölderlin, the romantic German poet, of a lake undulating on the waves of a boat, as opposed to a boat undulating on the waves of a lake. What are your dreams? Doc, please conceptualize my illness. And this is the most important thing I say to doctors who don't know much about ME. Because when a doctor doesn't know much about something, they run the risk of simply refusing to conceptualize it at all. And when they do that, they're engaging in a professional lapse. They're doing something inappropriate. And when I encounter that, I simply bluntly call it out. Let's take an example. Imagine that an ME patient is delivered into a doctor's office displaying symptoms that look like they could be the symptoms of a panic attack. And the doctor says, well, looks like a panic attack, probably is a panic attack. But of course, ME patients show remarkable levels of neurological and autonomic dysfunction. And of course, so often these kinds of dysfunction generate the symptoms of a panic attack without the thing being a panic attack at all. Now, I'm not saying the patient isn't having a panic attack. I'm just saying that you can't think about whether they are or aren't without taking ME and bringing it into the circle of consideration, and only on that basis deciding what's actually going on. Now, take another example. Imagine that you don't have ME, you've got a heart condition, and you go in to see a doctor complaining of a backache. The doctor will immediately raise the question of whether your heart condition is part of the explanation for what's wrong. And it might be that it isn't, but to ask whether it is or isn't is what it means to conceptualize your health condition. When a person with ME is resting, they're not relaxing, they're not taking a break. They're engaged in a positive activity, a demanding activity, and they're doing something very special and very important. They're not a boat in the bay with the anchor down, with the sail down, taking a break. No, their sails are up and they're out in open water. Resting is a positive, a demanding, everyday response to extraordinary life conditions. So it's important that people without ME understand that these folks are not having a little break. In fact, they are doing a daily ritual that goes to the core of what it means to be a human being going through an extraordinary predicament. I felt briefly a lot less well than I usually feel, and in the middle of it had the most extraordinary dream. Very briefly, just for a few hours last night, I struggled to move and to speak. But in the middle of it, I managed to fall asleep. and I had the most extraordinary dream I think I have had in 39 years of life. It was low-level flight in the context of a red sunset, and the houses and the buildings were the most dazzling, bright colors, shades of pink and scarlet and red, but not crass. And the movement was so elegant and sensual, the way I took my turns as I flew. And the other thing I remember are magically oversized apple trees, to the power of 10 or 20 the size of a normal apple tree, with giant apples with hues of bright red in them. The narrative of the dream isn't extraordinary, but its piercing clarity is amazing. It's the best dream I've had, and it was, in such a primitive and predictable way, a response to the temporary physical situation I felt. Pleasure has an interesting relationship with disability, because disability makes you need pleasure more, but it makes you be able to enjoy it less. And I'm particularly talking about unsustainable pleasures, pleasures you can't enjoy on a daily basis, at least without being punished for it. Of course, living with a disability, unique disability like ME, is so complex. It's about balancing so much, practically and also psychologically, balancing acceptance with refusal to accept, balancing feeling joy because you are in the world and life is amazing, balancing joy with grief because there are things you have lost. So it's complex. But there's an expression which is important, which is that sometimes you got to spend money you don't have. And I think that's sometimes true of the energy envelope with ME. Sometimes you got to do something that isn't judicious, whether it's that you dance for 25 seconds instead of the 10 seconds that you can normally bear, if you can bear it at all. But it might be something. If you're bedbound, it might be doing something in bed that you can just about do, but isn't terribly sustainable for you. And, you know, my personal pleasure, one of them at least, is wine. I don't like having alcohol in my body, but I love the work of certain great wine producers around the world. I collect wine to a limited extent. I think about wine quite a bit. And sometimes it happens, of course, that I enjoy a fine wine, and I can say about that moment that it's not necessarily physically good for my health, but that it's a triumph. Time is a really precious commodity if you've got ME. And so the person with ME is like the CEO of a company. Every minute of their time really matters. Their time is worth more than its price in gold. Now, here's how I apply that principle in my life. Of course, it would be ungodly to be the CEO who tries to convert every 1 hour meeting into a 7-minute meeting and apply that all across your life. So with my social interactions, I break them down into 2 categories. The free social interaction, where I just allow everything to happen as it naturally would. And the concentrated, instrumental, completely utilitarian social interaction. Let's say somebody's asking me for advice, or somebody is wanting my feedback on something. I will tell them, call me at hour X and we will talk for 5 minutes or 15 minutes. And what will not happen in that conversation is that there will be no preambles, there'll be no building up of context beyond what's necessary. We'll get straight to the point and then we'll say, great, bye. And then on the other side, I will have completely relaxed, open, unrestricted conversations, but nothing in the middle. So if somebody is calling me to ask about whether there is a good plumber in the local area, there won't be a 7-minute hi, how you going? It'll be, yep, there is one, here's the number, bye. Or there'll be a beautiful long conversation, but nothing in the middle. The well-bodied are so insecure around disability, and it's important not to forget that. Just take a look at an object like the wheelchair. It's treated either with confusion or as an emblem of tragedy. But in fact, I think for most people who use a wheelchair, it's an object of liberation. So it's very important to evacuate the well out of their insecurity. And a great way to do that is to ask from both sides. So the well should ask the disabled, I'm your friend. I know that you're sick. How would you like me to conduct my friendship with you? Or how would you like me to conduct my professional relationship with you? What are your needs? What do you want? How do things work for you? What do you love? And it's important to ask the other way round too. So it's crucial that disabled folks understand that they have a right to denormalize the normal give and take of their relationships with well people. You don't have to trade in the same quantities of energy or the same quantities of time as the well do. And it's really important to make specific asks, which aren't demands, but just statements of what you want, what you love, how things specifically work for you. That kind of ask and that kind of specificity so often will take the well person out of their insecurity. And very often they'll actually be happier that they understand the situation, understand you. Imagine that you've got ME. Imagine that you're in bed. Imagine that you've got 10 to 30 symptoms, some of which are stopping you from doing what you want, but some of them are just a little bit torturous, so that you don't think of them as stopping you from doing what you want. You actually think of them as things you just want to stop. So it's one thought too many to see them as obstacles to some goods you want to achieve out there in the world. You just want the symptoms to go away. So I feel like that now. What's it like? And of course, I'll probably only be able to bring out one aspect of it in a brief video. So let's do it. Well, the aspect that's on my mind is that pain and suffering is actually terribly accessible and shareable and obvious and banal and not mysterious. We're going to talk about this in much more detail in the longer episodes of my diary. How mysterious is this situation of the physical experience people feel? It doesn't feel mysterious. I am somebody who has a need to be understood, not in every part of what I do. My professional activities actually have no need for those to be understood because I'm so settled and so certain in them. But my emotional world, I feel it needs to be understood by people around me. I don't have any feeling of loneliness. I don't have any feeling of not being understood, any feeling of not being seen when I have symptoms and I'm in pain, because I think that actually is something that is quite easily translatable. And there is a sort of English literature department tendency to make pain mysterious when it actually ain't. Today I want to honor that moment when people with ME feel a new shock. And I don't mean by that the things that people without ME might think I mean. I don't mean the shock of getting some secondary health condition while you have ME, although that often happens, particularly with accumulation of years living with a body with inflammation. And I don't mean a sort of trauma or PTSD type of shock in the face of, getting the illness originally. What I mean is the kind of shock that you feel when you're already out at sea and you're dependent on the currents and the tides and the weather, and you have half a paddle. And you think, well, okay, that's what it's like to be sort of stranded. And then you realize that you're being pulled out further, and that you're being stranded again, and now on a different level. And you didn't expect it, and it doesn't make sense, and it's hellish. And that's an experience that people with ME across the spectrum of severity feel from time to time. They don't feel it every day, but it happens to most people with ME. It happens with some regularity, and it's a profoundly challenging experience because it brings together feeling absolutely horrendous, feeling horrendous in new ways, and spectacular uncertainty about what that means. So these are the life facts of chronic illness and myalgic encephalomyelitis.